In this video, we're going to be talking about how to make songwriting a habit. This video is inspired and almost directly from Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is a fantastic book. This is our second video on this book. So in the first video, we talked about why it's important to form the habit of songwriting or habits in general versus just having goals. But in this video, we're specifically breaking down how to actually make songwriting a habit. So one of the foundational concepts found within this book is the concept of the habit loop, which really has just 4 steps. The first is cue, and then you have craving, and then you have response, and then you have reward. This is also put in the way of make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and then make it satisfying. So in this video, we're going to break down how to apply that to songwriting to create a really good songwriting habit. Again, be sure to check out the previous video if you are wondering, why do I care about creating a songwriting habit? Why does it matter? I split this video into 2 parts effectively, so check that out if you're not sold on the idea of it being important to have a songwriting habit. So the first law is basically to have a cue or make it obvious. This is really the idea of having a bowl of fruit on the counter. If when you go into your kitchen, the most obvious food to eat is fruit, you're much more likely to make the healthy choice of grabbing a banana rather than a cookie. On the other side, if you had a cookie jar on the counter, then you're much more likely to grab a cookie than you would be to go into the refrigerator, find an orange, peel an orange, and then eat that, because it's way easier to just grab a cookie. So the idea is we want to set up our environment in a way that it's obvious, hey, I should songwrite or I should practice the piano. This could be something as simple as having a desktop background that says, hey, write music today. You could set up your computer so that it automatically opens your DAW, your digital audio workstation, your recording software, basically every time you turn on your computer. That way, again, it's obvious, because as soon as you start your computer is basically going to tell you, hey, you want to work on some music? And ultimately, James Clear breaks it down as most cues come down to time and location. For example, if you go into the kitchen, that's usually a cue of like, hey, I should eat something. Or if you walk past a donut shop, that's most likely to get you to be like, you know what? I do want a donut. So a great way to apply this to songwriting is if you have an extra room in your house you don't really use, maybe a guest bedroom or something, you could actually set that up to be your music making room, where you decide, hey, whenever I go into this room, the only thing I'm going to do in here is make music. Maybe you set up your little recording booth. Maybe that's where you put your computer that you actually do recording with. Maybe that's where you keep your guitars. Have a place where it's really obvious, hey, this is where I make music. Or if you can't do that, you also could have a specific time that you get in the habit of making music. Maybe set an alarm on your phone for 8:30 at night or 9:30 at night, where it literally reminds you, hey, it's songwriting time. Of course, there's nearly infinite ways to ultimately create a cue or make it obvious to yourself to, hey, you should songwrite, or hey, you should work on practicing your instrument. But hopefully some of those ideas get your brain going of how you specifically can create some cues to remind yourself, hey, I should songwrite. So the second law is craving, or make it attractive. If you do have a cookie jar on the counter, not only is it something that it's obvious, right? There are cookies, but then it's most likely that the sight of cookies is going to make you crave cookies. Now you're like, you know what? I didn't even think about cookies until I see them right there. Now I want a cookie. And a cookie is irresistible because it's filled with tons of sugar and other things that momentarily make our taste buds very, very happy, even if we're upset at ourselves later. So in the same way, we want to set ourselves up so that we can then crave songwriting once the cue hits. So once that alarm goes off that says, hey, it's songwriting time, or once we enter the room, that is the room that we only use for songwriting, we want to make sure that there's this irresistible pull to actually songwrite. Of the 4 steps, I think this is probably the most nebulous how we would do this with songwriting. But one example would be having somebody like an accountability buddy, somebody who's going to actually keep you accountable to songwrite. Maybe if you have some friends that are songwriting, maybe they're working on an EP and you're working on an EP. If there's sort of a social pressure that makes it so that you actually do want to songwrite because you want to keep up with them, and you see that they just released their awesome EP and you're like, yeah, I want to release that too. And I want to be a part of the group, because we all do have that innate desire to be a part of the group. That's why they say that we tend to be the average of the 5 people closest to us and all that, because there is a lot of peer pressure involved in the choices that we make. So if we leverage it into good peer pressure, that can be a great way to really incentivize incentivize us to actually pick up on the cue and turn it into a craving so that we actually do the thing we're trying to train ourselves into doing. Perhaps an easier place to take this is actually on the instrument practice side of things. Just taking instrument lessons is not just helpful because you have an instructor who knows better than you teaching you how to take the next steps in your progression as an instrumentalist. Another part of the benefit is you have somebody that you know you're going to see every single week who's going to be disappointed in you if you didn't practice. Whereas if you did practice and you did make strides, you know they'll be proud of you. So the value of actually having lessons with somebody every week is well beyond just having somebody to teach you, but is also the peer pressure to make you actually want to practice because you know that every single week you're going to go visit them. And if it's clear to them you didn't practice, they're probably going to be a little bit upset or disappointed in you or something else that hopefully gets you to be like, you know what, I probably should actually practice. So if you are stuck with your instrument growth and that's something that's really holding back your songwriting, you might want to actually consider having lessons with an instructor, because that way it will incentivize you and really force you to actually practice every week, because you're probably not going to go 4 weeks straight without practicing when you have an instructor who's going to be disappointed in you 4 weeks straight. You're probably either going to stop paying the money every week just to accomplish nothing, or more likely the combination of the money it costs plus the fact that you keep disappointing your teacher is probably going to make you actually feel the peer pressure to actually practice and get better. And next is the third law, called response, or make it easy, which is perhaps the most revolutionary of all to me, or at least it was revolutionary when I thought of it a few months before I actually read the book. And then when I read the book, it really solidified it for me. But it's something that I've taken and really run with and has been super helpful. And really, this is just the idea, going back to the cookie jar versus having a bowl of fruit out on the counter. It's really just the idea of you want to reduce friction to doing the thing that you want to do as much as possible. So for example, at some point I realized that if I actually forced myself to drive to a gym, I didn't do it nearly as often as if I just had weights in my own house. I really didn't want to drive 15 minutes in one direction just to go work out. So instead I decided to reduce the friction. And since I've reduced the friction, I only just have to walk into a certain room into my house and then boom, all my workout equipment is there. Now I've basically not really missed more than like 1 or 2 days a week once in a great while in the past like 2 years. And in the same way, I've also recorded a lot more music and worked on songwriting a lot more since I readjusted my studio to, again, reduce the friction to recording as much as possible. Overall, we need to make it as easy as possible for ourselves to practice our instrument, or for ourselves to actually songwrite or record, or whatever our different songwriting goals might be. And this could look just as easy as keeping your guitars out on a stand right next to your desk compared to having it put away in a closet in a case. Because the difference between reach, grab, practice a little bit of guitar while you're watching a video or while you're in a work meeting versus needing to go into a closet, find it in the closet, take it out of the case. That little bit of friction difference might be the difference between actually getting in the habit of practicing guitar every day and not. And the fourth law is reward, or simply make it satisfying. The idea is that no matter what, we're not going to actually go back and repeat this habit again if it wasn't something that ultimately was satisfying. A great way to sort of make something satisfying is simply just having a habit tracker. Even just having a calendar where you X off the date on the calendar for every day that you actually do the thing, like songwriting or practicing your guitar or piano. Just that can be something that incentivizes you. Because once you get 6 days straight of practicing the piano, there's sort of this innate desire to not want to break the chain. You see 6 X's in a row and you're like, I want to make that 7. I don't want to have a gap. I've had 6 in a row. I don't want to break the chain. I want to keep going. But also in general, we can make it satisfying by making progress. This is something that I've talked about in a recent podcast or video, and it's really that psychological game we play with ourselves. Ultimately, if you're stuck on a song and you just force yourself to work on that song that you're stuck on over and over and over again, and you don't take any break from that song and then come back to it, that might turn into a problem because it will start to not be satisfying anymore to work on songwriting because you're just stuck, you're frustrated, there's nothing satisfying about it anymore. we need to make some steady progress in our songwriting, in our learning of an instrument, in order to keep going and keep it a satisfying experience that makes us want to come back the next day and do it all over again. So ultimately, as I talked about in that video or podcast, something that can be really important to do is to really set things up so that if you know, hey, it's been a week straight of just laboring at this song, not making any progress, I'm really starting to get frustrated, then maybe take a songwriting day where instead you do something that's more fun or easy that reminds you of the fun of songwriting and of the progress you can make with songwriting. Some easy things to pick are just accumulating ideas. If you just sit down and say, okay, this songwriting session, I'm literally just gonna come up with cool song titles, go find some art on Google that I think could inspire a cool song. And that can be something that is productive because it could result in a really great song down the line, but is also fairly easy compared to, say, editing lyrics to actually work really well, which can be a more difficult part of the songwriting process. So those are the 4 laws of creating a habit loop and specifically relating them to songwriting and music and getting better at songwriting and music. Something else that is really important that is talked about in this book for the creation of habits, there's a lot of data to back up the idea that really it's more important to do things many times than it is the number of minutes or hours. So for example, if you every single Saturday spend 5 hours songwriting versus you get in the habit of actually songwriting 15 minutes a day, even though 15 minutes a day won't add up to as much time per week as the 5 hours on a Saturday, the 15 minutes a day is much more likely to actually form a habit because it's something that you do every single day. And oftentimes repetition is going to result in habit forming more so than time. So if you start with a habit of just walking for 5 minutes after every single meal, that's much more likely to take hold as a habit than, say, having yourself walk for an hour after a meal, but you only do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So if you are a person that mostly has had a songwriting day rather than committing to even a short amount of time of songwriting every single day or every other day, I would highly recommend you actually try to get into a habit of, say, 15 minutes of songwriting a day, 15 minutes of practicing piano a day or guitar a day, whatever your instrument is. I would highly recommend trying to do that and forming a habit around that rather than simply asking yourself to do a heavy load every Saturday or Sunday or whatever day you happen to have more free time. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to pick up this book. I'll put a link in the description down below. Really one of the most revolutionary books I've read in my adult life. Honestly, I would put it right next to Start With Why, and Start With Why is frankly what sort of prompted me to start Songwriter Theory. So needless to say, it's been pretty impactful. Highly recommend it. It will help you with more than just songwriting because, of course, it's not even about songwriting. It's just something that you certainly can relate to songwriting, but you can relate it to anything. Be sure to check the book out. I'm convinced that no matter who you are, this book absolutely will help you. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to check out my free guide, 10 different ways to start writing a song. If now you're incentivized, you're like, all right, I'm sold. I'm going to get in the habit of songwriting 15 minutes a day. Where do I start? Be sure to grab this guide. It will talk about 10 different ways to start a song. Whether you're new to songwriting or a seasoned vet, there should be something for you. I'm convinced the easiest way to stay creatively fresh is simply by changing up how we start our songs. If we always grab a guitar and start with a chord progression, we tend to get creatively stuck more so than if sometimes we reverse engineer a song by creating a song title that we think, that seems like it would be a cool song, and then ask ourselves, what would that song be about? What would that song sound like? Or doing something like starting with a bass line or starting with a melody or starting with a piano riff compared to just starting with a chord progression. That, for me at least, has been one of the best ways for me to stay creatively fresh and not constantly get into a rut where I'm like, please, Muse, come back to me. So hopefully it will help you out as well. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.